This is the greatest mystery in human history. According to legend, an entire continent, which supposedly possessed incredible technologies, disappeared beneath the waters of the ocean in just one day and one night. Several millennia ago, the philosopher Plato told his students a story that left a lasting mark on the understanding of the past. He told them about the legendary Atlantis. It was not just a vague legend. The philosopher gave striking details. A mighty island, larger than Libya and Asia combined, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Its capital was a masterpiece of engineering, a city of perfect concentric rings of land and water, connected by bridges and canals for navigation. Its temples sparkled with a mysterious, now extinct metal, orichalcum, which emitted a light similar to flame. Plato described this civilization as a maritime power with a powerful fleet and army. But Plato described not only the greatness of Atlantis, but also its war. He claimed that the Atlanteans were an arrogant race of warriors who conquered parts of Europe and Africa and waged war against the ancestors of the Athenians, who, according to him, were able to stop their aggression in ancient times. According to Plato, the destruction of Atlantis was not an accident, but a just retribution from the gods for their pride. But what was it really? Just a clever philosophical parable, Plato's invention, intended to warn the Athenians against the pursuit of imperial power. Or perhaps he was describing a real, unimaginable catastrophe, the echoes of which reached him through time. And if Atlantis was real, how many more such myths are hidden in the depths of centuries, waiting for their moment? Let's assume for a moment that Plato was telling the truth, that Atlantis is not a figment of the imagination. But then what kind of civilization are we talking about? This is not just another ancient kingdom with advanced metallurgy. The scale of the legend, the disappearance of an entire continent in one night, requires an explanation that goes beyond the ordinary, almost mystical. The history of Atlantis goes far beyond ordinary archaeology and enters the realm of lost magic. The most ardent supporters of this theory do not stop at bronze or iron. They talk about lost technologies that humanity cannot yet understand. They talk about vril energy, a fundamental force of the universe, an almost supernatural energy that, in their opinion, the Atlanteans knew how to control. Vril, according to these myths, was not just an energy similar to electricity. It was a living force, the soul of the world, which could be directed by the power of thought. It had the ability to heal, animate mechanisms, destroy mountains, and even give the initiated the gift of telepathy. It was the fundamental code of reality, which, according to legend, the Atlanteans managed to crack. The secret of this power was crystals. Mystics do not describe them simply as firestones, but as a complex energy network that powered the entire continent. In legends, they tell of the great crystal called Twaoi. It was no ordinary ornament. It was a huge, artificially grown crystal of exceptional purity, possibly cylindrical or spherical in shape, placed in the main temple dedicated to Poseidon. According to legend, this temple was an architectural masterpiece. Its dome could open, exposing the crystal to the rays of the sun, moon, and distant stars. The Twaoi was not an ordinary battery. It served as a cosmic resonator. It is said that it was able to accumulate vril energy from the ether, transform it, and transmit it throughout the island to special crystal receivers without the use of wires. These crystals provided eternal light and powered silent flying machines called vimanas, which hovered above the ground as if ignoring gravity. Vril energy also powered the force fields that protected the capital and the ray weapons that Plato could only describe as lightning bolts. This was a civilization that wielded not mechanics, but the forces of the universe. They had transcended the limits of physical existence. In these legends, the Atlanteans were not ordinary people. Centuries of using this energy, according to the storytellers, had changed their bodies. They speak of a society that had almost overcome aging, living for hundreds of years. It describes a society that communicated telepathically, considering spoken language an outdated means of communication. They did not simply live in harmony with nature, as we would say. They mastered it. Legends tell that the priests of Atlantis possessed advanced forms of bioengineering, creating chimeras, creatures that were hybrids of humans and animals, to be exploited as slaves and modifying the nature of plants to produce incredible harvests. They were a civilization that considered themselves demigods, and in their pride, they elevated themselves to the level of gods. And for this, according to legend, they were punished. But the catastrophe that destroyed them was not a normal earthquake or flood. It was not the wrath of Zeus who sent lightning down from Olympus. It was a technological apocalypse caused by their own magic. Legend has it that the Atlanteans divided into two camps. The sons of Belial, mired in materialism and dark rituals, sought to use the great crystal as an almighty weapon to subjugate the rest of the world. They managed to bring its power to incredible heights. As a result, an overload occurred. The Tuaoi became destabilized. The energy it had accumulated over centuries suddenly burst out in an uncontrollable stream. It was not an ordinary explosion, it was a rupture of reality. Mystics tell of how the sky split open, how the very fabric of space-time was scorched by the power of pure energy. This catastrophic cataclysm triggered a chain of events. Monstrous earthquakes split continents, volcanoes around the world spewed billions of tons of ash, and perhaps the planet's poles shifted. Atlantis did not simply disappear underwater. It vanished from the face of the earth, destroyed by its own power, drowning in the boiling abyss of the ocean. It was a divine sentence that they brought upon themselves. If Plato left us a hint of the existence of Atlantis, and the mystics of the 20th century left us a description of its magic, then EDGAR CAYCE seemed to be able to see its past with his own eyes. In everyday life, he was a simple photographer from Kentucky, a devout Christian with no outstanding academic achievements. However, in a state of deep trance, he became an amazing phenomenon. He was nicknamed the Sleeping Prophet, because, as they said, he could leave his body and connect with what he called the Akashic Records, a comprehensive library where the history of every soul and every event in the universe is stored. Cayce extracted thousands of pages of information about Atlantis from these chronicles. His readings were not vague predictions in the spirit of Nostradamus. They were strikingly specific. He described in detail the geography of the continent, its flora and fauna. Cayce claimed that Atlantis was not a single island, but rather an entire archipelago, the main island of which was Poseidonis. He confirmed all previously expressed assumptions. He spoke of the great crystal of Tuaoi as a source of incredible energy. Cayce went even further and presented Atlantean society as a battlefield between two opposing ideologies. On one side was the Law of One, a spiritual group striving to achieve harmony. On the other was the Sons of Belial, materialists who wanted power, wealth, and universal control. It was the Sons of Belial, Cayce claimed, who conducted genetic experiments, creating hybrids, half human, half animal, to be exploited as slaves. These, he said, were the very chimeras, minotaurs and centaurs we know from Greek mythology. Cayce believed that in a past life he was an Atlantean priest named Ra-Ta. According to him, foreseeing the destruction of Atlantis, Ra-Ta fled with a group of his disciples to Egypt, taking with him some of Atlantis's knowledge and documents. Cayce described the destruction of the continent not as a single event, but as a sequence of three great cataclysms. The first two, separated by millennia, split the continent and undermined its civilization. The third, the last flood, which occurred approximately 10,000 years BC, was fatal. According to Cayce, it was then that the Sons of Belial, in their quest for power, brought the great crystal to a critical point, leading to a pole shift. It is important to note that Cayce made a specific, verifiable prediction. He claimed that Poseidonis sank near the Bahamas, in a place now known as the Bermuda Triangle, and that in 1968 or 1969, off the coast of one of the islands of this archipelago, Bimini, the ruins of the temples of Atlantis will rise from the depths of the ages. The prophecy was formulated in the 1930s, but decades later it was practically forgotten. And then came the year 1968. At that time, pilots flying over the shallow waters off the coast of North Bimini saw something amazing under the turquoise water. It was not a normal pile of stones. It was a perfectly straight, geometrically precise line of huge rectangular stone slabs stretching for almost a kilometer before plunging into the depths. The discovery, made exactly on the date predicted by Cayce, caused a real sensation in the media. Divers, archaeologists and mystics flocked to the site. What they saw resembled the remains of a cyclopean pavement or the foundation of a huge wall. Some of the blocks, reaching 5 meters in length and weighing dozens of tons, were laid with such filigree precision that they gave the impression of being man-made. This phenomenon was named the Bimini Road. Immediately after the sensation appeared, the scientific world tried to refute it. Geologists put forward a theory about the so-called beach rock, a natural process in which sand and shells, cemented in the tidal zone, form flat slabs. In their opinion, these slabs subsequently break down into rectangular blocks under the influence of erosion and internal stresses. However, supporters of the mystical theory had a convincing answer to this. They pointed out that beach rock is usually formed on the seashore, while the Bimini Road is located at a depth of several meters. People wondered, how could nature divide the rock into such precise rectangles? Why do many blocks appear to be stacked in 2 layers, and some are even held in place from below by smaller stones, as in classic megalithic masonry? The debate continues to this day. Geologists stubbornly stick to their point of view. But for mystics, the answer was clear. Cayce was right. These are not just stones. These are the remains of the sunken temple of Poseidon. Atlantis, silent for 10,000 years, finally gave signs from its watery depths. And here is the main question that arises after this legend. What if they did not disappear at all? What if the surviving Atlanteans, those who possessed the vril, scattered around the world, preserving fragments of their knowledge? It is this theory that connects Atlantis with all the major mysteries of our planet, the pyramids of Egypt and the temples of the Maya. How can we explain why societies that seemed primitive at first glance managed to build such similar and incredibly complex structures that required precise astronomical and engineering calculations? Adherents of the mystical theory claim that this is no coincidence. It is a legacy, a unified style left behind by the surviving Atlanteans, who tried to recreate their former glory in new lands, in Egypt and Mesoamerica. This theory elevates the lost continent to the rank of patient zero, the source of all human civilization, all magical knowledge and secrets. This is a fundamental myth, a cultural code that has shaped our worldview for 2 millennia. What if the traces of this patient zero civilization are hidden not on land, but under the sea? South of Japan, in the deep waters off the island of Yonaguni, giant underwater structures have been discovered. These are not just random piles of stones. They are perfectly flat steps, reaching several meters in height, massive platforms and terraces created with astonishing precision, close to mathematical accuracy. The central monument resembles a stepped pyramid carved out of a solid rock massif. Geologists claim that this is just a strange game of nature, a natural sandstone fault that accidentally broke at right angles. At the same time, many are convinced that this structure is man-made. Divers who have explored the site talk about roads, pools, and even a stone that, in their opinion, is carved in the shape of a giant turtle. Japanese researcher Masaki Kimura has been trying for many years to prove that these are ruins. He points out objects that he considers to be walls, gates, and even a face carved into the rock, reminiscent of a sphinx. This is Japanese Atlantis, which is believed to have sunk more than 10,000 years ago, even before the end of the last ice age. If this date is confirmed, the question arises, who or what could have built this grandiose structure? Local Okinawan legends tell of a palace of the god on the seabed that disappeared in ancient times. This mystery calls into question everything we think we know about our past. This place resembles a ritual complex, a temple, as if built by Cyclops, which was swallowed by the ocean as a result of the same catastrophe as the legendary Atlantis. This is another link in the chain of great myths. Atlantis was not the only otherworldly legend. It had a mythical twin in another ocean. Lemuria, or the continent of Mu, according to mystical treatises, was a huge continent stretching across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. It was another civilization that was referred to as Zero. Esotericists such as Helena Blavatsky believed that the Lemurians were even older than the Atlanteans, a race of spiritual giants, ancestors of humanity, who possessed ethereal bodies and a third eye. According to legend, this eye was not a physical organ, but served as the center of their supernatural power, allowing them to see the vril energy flows and communicate telepathically. James Churchward, another mystic, claimed that in India he managed to discover ancient Nakal tablets describing this civilization and its demise. Why is this myth needed? To explain what science cannot explain. For example, how did lemurs end up in Madagascar and India? The answer is Lemuria. Or how did the giant Moai statues appear on Easter Island, far from other lands? How was the megalithic city of Nan Madol built from thousands of basalt logs? The answer, according to supporters of the myth, is that all these mysteries are connected with the sunken continent of Mu. This myth suggests that our world was built on the ruins of not one, but at least two great civilizations that disappeared in the past. The myth of Atlantis promised knowledge and lost magic, but other myths offered something more material and more dangerous: gold. The legend of El Dorado is a striking example of a killer myth. It is not just a story about the Golden Man, a ruler who covered himself in gold dust and gave the gods untold treasures in the sacred lake of Guatavita. It was a deceptive phantom promising wealth. In the minds of the conquistadors, the legend underwent a transformation, turning the ritual into a whole mythological reality. The city of Manoa, the Golden City, where the roofs were supposedly made of pure gold and the streets were strewn with emeralds. However, there was another darker legend. It was said that this city was inaccessible to those who were not pure of heart. It was said that it was protected by the magic of the jungle, that the spirits of the Amazon deprived those who came with selfish intentions of their minds. It was said that the city moves, disappearing from one gorge and appearing in another, constantly eluding the hands of invaders. Belief in cursed gold gave rise to madness. Dozens of expeditions set out for the green hell of the Amazon, but never returned. People led by Lopez de Aguirre and Walter Raleigh disappeared in the impenetrable jungle. But magical curses were not the cause of their demise. They were destroyed by hunger, disease, and their own greed, which turned the search into bloody paranoia. The jungle became an antagonist, a living, intelligent enemy that consumed and drove mad anyone who tried to unravel its golden secret. El Dorado was never found. The legend fed on the lives of these people. The year was 1925. The 20th century exacted the highest price, a seeker whose motives were not related to gold. Colonel Percy Fawcett was a man with a different worldview. He was a mystic, an explorer, a cartographer for the Royal Geographical Society. His goal was not wealth, he was searching for the truth. And like others, he was obsessed with this idea. Fawcett believed that deep in the Brazilian jungle, in the Mato Grosso region, lay an ancient, highly developed civilization. He did not consider it to be local. He was convinced that it was the last fragment of Atlantis itself. In his opinion, the Atlanteans who survived the catastrophe found refuge in South America and built their cities there, using lost, almost supernatural technologies. His belief was not based solely on rumors. During his expeditions, he claimed to have seen mysterious blue lights in the forests and encountered white, blue-eyed Indians, potential descendants of an ancient civilization. His main goal, based on the mysterious Manuscript 512, a Portuguese document that, according to rumors, tells of the ruins of a city made of shining stone, was formulated by him briefly and with enthusiasm. It was his final expedition. On May 29, 1925, Colonel Fawcett, his eldest son Jack, and their companion Raleigh Raimel sent their last message from Dead Horse Camp. They broke camp and ventured into uncharted territory from which no one had ever returned. They were never found again. He became the most famous victim of the curse of lost cities, searching for a mystical civilization. But he himself became a myth. So, we've dived into the world of legends. Atlantis, YONAGUNI, Lemuria, El Dorado, Zay. All these stories are wonderful and extremely dangerous. And now for the documentary truth. What happens when humanity manages to discover a lost city? In the 19th century, the scientific community was unanimous in its opinion. The Trojan War was a fiction. They considered Homer's great poem, the Iliad, not a historical narrative, but a collection of fairy tales, the national epic of the Greeks, nothing more. Searching for the real Troy was considered as absurd as searching for Olympus or the kingdom of Hades. However, Heinrich Schliemann, an eccentric German entrepreneur who made his fortune in trade, was convinced that Homer had not exaggerated, and he decided to start excavations. Instead of magical crystals, traces of vril, or the palaces of demigods, he discovered a city. Bricks, clay shards, charred beams, and Priam's treasure, a collection of gold jewelry that belonged not to gods, but to people. Schliemann proved that myths can have a basis in reality. However, he also demonstrated how far reality is from mythical representations. Troy was not a magical kingdom, but an ordinary fortress destroyed by a real fire. This reality check brings us back to the tragic story of Percy Fawcett. Decades passed, and the mystery of City Z was considered a figment of an obsession with mysticism. It seemed that the jungle had prevailed, swallowing both the man and his secret. The scientific world rejected this story, until something new, almost supernatural, appeared: LIDAR, laser scanning capable of penetrating thick green vegetation. Archaeologists, flying planes over the Amazon, saw something on their computer screens that shook the world. Under the dense tree canopy, in the Mato Grosso region, and in the upper reaches of the Xingu River, where Fawcett disappeared, clear outlines appeared. These were not random traces, but entire roads, straight as arrows, bridges, wide squares, and ruins of massive structures. They had found what had long been considered impossible: Kukikugu. Long before the arrival of Europeans, a complex civilization existed in the Amazon, comprising a network of 20 cities and settlements inhabited by tens of thousands of people. Colonel Percy Fawcett was right. City Z, or rather, a whole system of such cities, really did exist. You can't call him crazy. He was on the verge of one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, but fate decided otherwise. He never got to know about his great discovery. The mystery he was looking for was real, but its price turned out to be too high: the Colonel's life. And that brings us back to where we started, to Plato and his legendary sunken continent. Fawcett was trying to find the magic of Atlantis, but he discovered the real Kukikugu. Schliemann sought the divine Troy, but found an earthly fortress. And perhaps this is the most bitter irony in human history, or the most convincing evidence that we still know nothing about our own history.